started blowing glass when I was in high school. It sounded like underwater basket weaving to me. It just sounded really strange. And I started taking a weekend class at a local art college in Detroit and got completely hooked on it. And 30 years later, I'm still doing it. I'm not quite clear how that happened, but it just honestly gets more fun the longer I do that. I met Charlie actually in a glass studio, and we started working together right away. We were hanging out as well, so then we were in studios together all the time. We wanted to be closer to family, so about 12 years ago we moved to Dresden and bought this barn.
I'm Charlie Jenkins, and Terrill and I met 22 years ago, and we were both independently working as glass artists, and we met, like she said, we met in studios in Oakland, California, and just paired up quite easily doing work that was similar to each other, complemented each other, and of course we became an item pretty quickly and started working side by side. Within a few years we owned our own studio together, making glass independently and together, mostly at the time making work by commission for other artists making their work, but broke away from that when we moved here more like 14 years ago, I think it was, and started pulling together our own line of work that was independent from the lighting that we used to do in the past. And even though we do lighting still, we focus more on the housewares that more of the general public would want to have in their homes and hopefully integrate and use on a daily basis. I wanted to move back from Oakland, California to be closer to my families, specifically, and to get Terrill closer to her families. And we found this house and this building, or these buildings. We found these buildings and thought it was hugely grand and offered the type of space and opportunity that would allow us to do the work that we do, and then also show the work that we do. We're close enough to the road, and we're close enough to enough big towns that people would find us by going from one town to the next, or they would just specifically seek us out. And we slowly but consistently improved the showroom and improved the studio so it suited our needs, but also felt more welcoming to the general public. But when we bought the place, it really looked pretty rough and needed a lot of help.
The space itself really lends itself to what we do because of the natural light. It's so fantastic. We got so lucky with that feature, and we have 2,000 square feet, which is amazing. So we have a pretty good sampling of all the different things that Charlie and I make both separately and together here. And in the course of our however many years of working together and working as tandem, the two have started to overlap quite a bit more. So, for instance, this is a design that Charlie does, and every once in a while he'll let me do the color on it, and that's one of my favorite things. It keeps me occupied when I'm helping him in the studio, and I get to play with that. That piece morphed into one of these pigs, which was a really great, not really a transgression, more of a sideways. I don't know, I love them in some ways much more than the space pictures, but it was a very playful chance to riff on that form. This is a piece, series that we do together. We started just making the cups for fun, and they became so popular that I thought we need to expand this into a line so people can really have collections of them. So that involves quite a bit of designing to really scale up that design and have it read well. But we've got little odds and ends that we make in the other pieces that we get to recycle into the bigger work. This, for instance, is actually of the very bottom of this, which we would normally throw away during the piece, but I started saving them because they were so beautiful, and they ended up in this work. So there's a lot of cross-pollination that's happening there. Since color really is my thing, I really love doing really simple color studies like this. And then that has sort of morphed into doing the Marini work for me. All these fun little teeny odds and ends get to be all sorts of playful experiments for me in my work. So there's like, this is another piece that I make that is like super playful looking, but really technically challenging. And to take a break from something that's so difficult and so exacting as that, and just be able to experiment with color in these pieces is really fun.
I came across the idea of the mortar and pestle many years after I figured out how to make this double helix bubble trap within the glass. It's something that you can see in history books, and several of my peers integrate this bubble design into some of their work. But we know we have a friend who actually provides and serves fresh organic spices and herbs that are available throughout Maine and the Northeast. And by being her friend, I came up with the idea of having a mortar and pestle, just to work the seeds that we get from her, organic seeds that we get from her. And one thing led to another. I designed the pestle, and then I figured out how to make the mortar to go with it. And I spent a whole day making one, and then another day making the mortars, and then a third day I'll grind and finish them, and then pair them together so they are a set. Obviously, you wouldn't have a large with the small mortar, so I spent a little time sort of making sure that they fit together. Right.
They work great, actually.
They
Like
do
I
work
was really
very well.
nervous, but I can mash up all kinds of really tough stuff, and then we don't have like garlic mojitos. You can clean them in between. So maybe that's a new thing. So this is basically where all the color pulls that all the long lengths of color end up before they become part of the work. We spend, honestly, over a 2-month period every year just making colors that are specific for this year that we're working. And the stripes of color that go into the work have to be the exact right density of color and really the right thickness to work well with the design. So if we get something that's slightly outside of those parameters, it just becomes a plaything. We actually, a lot of glass artists make their own color, but I am so nerdy about it and so specific that what I do is I find a specific color company that is making a color exactly the way I like it. And once I find it, I get as much of it as I can, because the studios that are making it, they're not like big suppliers like like Benjamin Moore or anything. They're little teeny studios, just like Charlie and my studio. And often it's like a family enterprise that is done in the garage. And I had a color one year that 2 artists made by accident, and they could never make it again. And I was in love with it, and I kept calling the company and saying, when are you getting more of that? And their rep finally just yelled at me and was like, you have to get over it. I was like, what are you talking about? So occasionally that happens where I'll get a color that I've figured out how to work with and really exploit to do exactly what I want, and then it's just not available anymore. So it comes in bars when we get it most frequently. And when I'm pulling out rods of color like this, I'll use either very small or very big amounts of it, depending on how much color density I need.
That's the color right there.
This is the color right here. So it's basically, depending on the color, it's a denser version of what we get. Like in a lot of the pieces that we use, this is kind of a normal amount of color that I would use for one of the colors that we do. These colors that I'm pulling right here are often layers of no more than this amount. If it's a color that goes pale very easily, like rubies and purples, you have to use huge chunks of it, otherwise they just go too pale. Which is unfortunate because the rubies and the purples are made with gold, so that's a very expensive color. Blues are cheaper because they're silver, like this is a silver blue. I don't know if you can see that there. But But yeah, it's a trick to be able to distribute that color evenly over the length of a pole so that you get a very consistent desired, amount of it. So when we are pulling this, will be the length of the studio. I'll start out with about a football size blob of the layers, and Charlie will bring a pipe and I'll connect them. I'll hand him back the rod, and then you both walk away from each other across the studio. And I think there's a video of it on our Facebook page, and it's very exciting. It's really a bummer when it doesn't work out right. So you have to do it. We'll do it as kind of consistently as possible. Like that's why we kind of do it in big chunks of time, like a week to a month, and then you get to know how the colors are going to behave because some are gooey and some are stiff, and then you have better results. But yeah, basically it ends up here, and then like the stripy glasses that I make, the butterfly ones, that's the size of the cane that I'll go. That's a little butterfly cup in the making right there. These are some of the colors that we use on Charlie's space pictures. And so they're more opaque. Charlie's always has an opaque, pretty typically. But again, if they don't come out right, then you can just have fun with them in the mosaic, and you can get very painterly with them. Like this is a color that just came out way too dense, and this I forgot what my formula was and made a lot of it. So what I'll do is I'll take them and bundle them up, and I've got just some steel wire, and I'll tie that together in a bundle like so. Usually I try and get as much in there as I can. It's like that burrito thing when you go to make a burrito and you end up with an omelet. It's like that. It's just, they're way too big and packed in there. But I get a really great variation of color that way. I can really kind of modulate the color density. I can make an orange look like a yellow or a green look like a yellow. So it's like much more painterly and less literal of a process than we typically have with the colors we use. So, but to circle back to your question, do we get our color made by other people? Yes, we do, but we always layer it in layers of 2 or 3 different colors so that we're getting something that's not only unique to our studio, but is totally unique to what we do from year to year. This year's, Charlie called them fish eggs, or no, frog eggs. And this I was really excited to cut up for you guys because I hadn't seen it yet myself. I don't know if you can see there's like a teeny darker spot in there, but it's a really beautiful marigold. I'm in love with that marigold yellow. And this one I haven't cut up yet, but basically when I pull them out, they're about twice this length, and I can cut them lengthwise or for spots, or I can cut them the long way for stripes. So there's a lot of, I've started actually carving through certain parts, so I reveal different parts of the color and then picking them up like that. So that's a fun thing. Over the course of that one length, I can experiment to see sort of how many different ways I can see that color and use that color. So it's like, they're like little building blocks that I make for myself, basically.
So we buy our color from factories around the world, and it's super condensed colored glass that comes to us in these bars and powders and chunks of color, super condensed colored glass. And we take these and get them hot, get them molten, and then layer them over each other, and layers of clear and color until you build up this would be the profile of something I'm talking about. Another example, usually we want to build it up and stretch it out so it's skinny like this, but sometimes we end up with great big thick sections. And we take those large sections and those skinny sections of cane, and we then integrate those into the finished work. And for the mosaic line, a lot of it comes out and looks like strands of color, zigzags, stringers, and zeros that we make in advance and then apply individually to each piece. And the straight colors, which are really like 2 or 3 colors layered, but it looks like just one color, those typically go onto the cups and the big pictures that we make, whereas this more wild decorative stuff gets put onto the decorations on the mosaic work that we do together. So in this corner, in this corner we have this box is our glass furnace that when it's on 24/7, and it keeps a molten pool of glass in there. And when it's full, it's about 300 to 350 pounds of molten glass at our disposal at any given time. And we just simply open the door, and it's cold now, but we gather glass out and individually work on that blob of glass in this station until it's finished. Maybe you can come a little closer. Normally, at this position in the studio, we're working out of the forge at this bench and using these tools, specifically just these tools, to handle the material. A pipe would rest here with a blob of glass, and we'd interact with the glass, forming it and manipulating it to suit the design that we're after. All of these tools are hundreds of years old in design. Obviously, everybody knows what a scissor looks like. This is based on an old knife and used for sculpting. These allow us to manipulate the glass in different ways and cut the glass and tweeze and interact with the material as it cools. And once it's cooled to 1,000 degrees, it is hardened and rigid enough to hold its shape. We break it from the steel pipes and put it in this oven in the side here that stays at what we call annealing temperature. Annealing is the slow cooling of glass or of any material. And in this case, it takes the stress out of the material while it's cooling slowly. Otherwise, it would crack or shatter under the duress of shock cooling. And that's that.
So
Yeah.
when I mentioned earlier that we had to scale up the design, it meant that we had to get a bigger mold to make the bubbles in. We typically, when we're doing the cups, will blow a bubble into this mold. It's really the only mold that we use in making our work, since everything is handmade. Each one of these little indentations or little points leaves an indentation in the bubble, so when we pull the glass out, it will look like a strawberry, the way the seeds sit on a strawberry in a perfect, nice geometric way. When we gather glass over that bubble, the glass is viscous and thick like honey, and so it can't roll into every little divot that the mold has made, and instead it traps an air bubble. And anybody who's familiar with molds knows that you can't have a negative indentation, or it's really hard to get out. We actually have to collapse the bubble to get it out of this mold. When we sized up and started making the bigger work, we really needed those bubbles to translate, so we had to go and get this. This larger mold. We love it. We had actually, I think each of us had been individually lusting after one of these molds for a long time. And so it is hard to get out of the mold. The other aspect is that to get a really nice print, which gives you a really nice bubble, you have to really blow hard into that mold and almost get stuck every single time. So there's that there's that kind of balance
Risk.
between, that kind of push and pull. When you do get stuck in it, it's a big drag. You have to get all the glass cold, and you have to pour water over it and pick it out, and it's a very soft metal, so you can damage the mold. So there's a lot of cursing. when you get stuck. But it's my favorite mold, even when we're not using it for this. If we were to blow a bubble into this and then just puff it out, it creates these squares, create this beautiful diamond-shaped pattern all over the surface of the glass that I totally love. So.